I'm back with a mini solo episode today. I am recording this, and actually, it is in response to a question that I get often, and it's also something that comes up quite a bit in coaching. So, I thought I would do a quick mini episode on this, just really answering it in a little bit more depth for you than I could on TikTok, let's say, or on Instagram, or even through email. So, the question that most families have for me is, what do we do when we're just not on the same parenting page as our partner? And I think it's a really fair question because one, I think even having the expectation that you're going to parent the exact same way feels um, unrealistic, right? You're two separate people, you're two individuals with your own process, your own journey, your own stuff, right? And nothing heals us more than the parent-child relationship. And so when we have our kids, it naturally starts to poke at things that might be left either unhealed in us, untended to, maybe looked over. And so when we're walking through this journey as a parent to a child, you're each going to sort of get triggered in different ways. But what I want to talk about today, and I think this has helped a lot of the couples that I work with, is this idea of what I call compensatory parenting. So if you don't tend to agree with the way your partner parents, or they don't agree with the way that you parent, what we typically fall into is what I call compensatory parenting. And what that means is, and I kind of just made this up and you'll understand why, but what it means is that the way we perceive our partner's parenting style, we tend to think there are deficits in what they're doing. And so as a result, we parent, or it shifts the way that we parent, and we tend to compensate for where we believe they are falling short, and vice versa. So let's use an example to just distill this down to something that feels manageable. So let's say you have parent A and parent B, and parent A believes that parent B is passive and permissive and too soft and lets the child get away with everything. And parent B believes that parent A is too strict, too cold, too harsh, and not empathetic enough. So this is generally the patterning that presents in coaching, or what I see. So what results then is the two parents, parent A and parent B, so the one who believes that the other is too soft, permissive, and passive, naturally believes then, and I have to be the tougher one. Somebody's got to keep things moving around here. Somebody's got to run a tight ship. So they naturally double down on a more stern parenting style because they believe they have to compensate for what the other parent isn't doing. Conversely, the other parent is saying, well, I have to be that soft place for them to fall. I have to kind of be a little bit more open in the way I approach things because the other parent is way too harsh, way too strict, and I have to compensate for that piece of it. So when we parent this way, what ends up happening is we are no longer paying close attention to what the child needs from a developmental standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, and it becomes a little bit more about what we are or are not doing and what we believe we have to do to fill in the blank for the other. And when we do this, we lose sight of the fact that there's probably this space in the middle. And that's usually what I tell most of the parents that I work with. And I say this quite honestly, I've never worked with a couple and believed that one was always right and the other was always wrong. It just doesn't happen. So in coaching, though I'm not by any means a marriage counselor or anything of that sort, what I am is an objective third party with expertise in child development. So I can weigh in on what your child needs rather than what you believe is needed or what needs to happen, because it's not, I have some distance from it. So I am not engaging in what I call the compensatory piece. So this can be really helpful. So if you're finding yourself in this position with your partner, sometimes coaching helps bridge that, because what we do work on is finding the middle, because to some extent, you're both probably a little bit right. And what we need to do, and because you're compensating, let me back up for a second and say this, because you're compensating for the other, it tends to push you into a more extreme side of parenting. So the passive parent becomes too passive, the harsh parent becomes too harsh and critical, and we're finding ourselves moving further and further away from that middle place. And the middle place is where you kind of need to blend both. You need a happy balance there. And the middle is usually where your child's needs live. So if we look at a concrete example, so let's say, and I'll pull this like right from coaching. So let's say a child is asking to do something and the parent says, no, you can't do that right now. And the child now grows very dysregulated. So if both parents are present, and we're doing compensatory parenting, both parents begin to immediately worry or consider what the other parent will do. We don't even realize we're doing this, but it tends to take mental real estate in our brains when we do this because now the focus shifts and we're like, oh no, he's going to blow up because, little Johnny's crying right now about what he's going to say is insignificant. And I got to go over there and be like the empathetic one and really like try to keep everything dialed down. And then the other parent might be going, oh, great, he's crying and whining because she's probably going to let him get whatever, whatever. And now we're going to sit and deal with a tantrum for the next 40 minutes. So you can almost see where those paths kind of cross or where this intersects and how it plays out in terms of the parenting landscape. So then one parent goes over and is trying to be the overdoer of empathy, talking, explaining, overgiving. And then the other parent is super riled up and they're like, that's it, go to your room. No one wants to see you crying like this. And they double down on their method. So instead, what you want to think about is this. So kids don't need a lot. I think we overcomplicate things when kids are having a hard time. So what we want to think about is this. If I have a child who is growing dysregulated because the answer is no, then I have a child who is struggling with accepting an outcome that they don't want, which is frustration, meaning if I want something and that something doesn't come to fruition, I will naturally feel frustrated about this. The difference is I, as an adult, have had countless opportunities to feel frustration, work with frustration, and move through it. Kids have not. So what ends up happening is frustration turns into emotional dysregulation. And it's not always frustration. I'm just using that as an example. But that turns into dysregulation. So it looks like a tantrum, protest, refusal, arguing, you name it, any one of those things, whining, all of those things happen. And we instead want to focus on stopping the behavior, which is the crying, the whining, the protest, and all of that. Where what I would tell you is let them cry and whine and do all of that, but remove them from whatever they're doing. Don't allow them to have access to anything that they want to be doing until they're able to calm down. And that's not a punishment, and that's also not mean. It's really teaching kids how to self-regulate while also providing some form of a barrier or some way of getting them to understand that they internally have to develop the skill of self-regulation. So the way we do that really, and I'm simplifying this, but what really has to happen is we set a boundary, we express empathy, and we restate the boundary. That's all that's required of us. So for the parent who tends to be a little bit more permissive, what ends up happening is they fall into the trap of over-explaining, talking too much, trying to use logic and reasoning to convince their kids that the boundary that they're setting is justifiable. And the minute we start to increase our talking, our input, whatever it is that we're doing to the child, even though it's really well-meaning, kids grow more dysregulated, or they see it as their first invite to start to argue back and create power struggle because now they're like, oh, well, I'm going to poke some holes in the thing she just said. And I'm going to say, well, 2 weeks ago, you let brother have cake before dinner. And, they remember. So they're kind of taking stock of whatever it is that you're saying. And they might start to argue back with you. A younger child might just start to scream and cry more and kick and do and express it in a different way. So the other parent who is more harsh, let's say, and more strict, might grow very frustrated and they won't show empathy. The boundary doesn't come out clear, and all of a sudden there is an explosive overreaction. So that looks more like, that's it. You can't, ever do anything else this weekend because you're acting like a baby. And we really kind of double down on this kind of more severe response. And honestly, like the punishment doesn't really fit the crime in this instance. So for that parent who tends to lean into a more sort of reactive style of parenting, what I would say to that parent is remember that formula and go back to what is being asked, which is state the boundary, clear and concisely, empathy. I know it's hard. You don't have to do a big, long explanation here. I know it's hard and we don't get what we want. Ugh, tough. I get it. But it's not changing. My answer is not changing. It's a no. And staying really firm in that while working on staying calm and regulated. Then at that point, if the child continues to escalate, you simply take the child and you just explain to them that once they're calm, we will re-engage or do things that you want to do. We will go and play. We will go back to wherever we were in the home at that time. We will basically you're just pausing whatever's happening in the home setting, allowing the child to completely self-regulate. You're not convincing them to self-regulate, you're not talking to them about it, you're not insisting they do it. You're just saying, hey, do you want to go back and play with your toys? Okay, as soon as you get calm down for 1 full minute, we'll go back. And that's essentially a break that Joe Newman teaches in his book, Raising Lions. I sometimes call it a reset because it's the idea that how do we pull our kids away in that moment, allow them to process, feel whatever they're feeling, and work towards regulation so then they can go back and resume. What tends to happen is sometimes we just let kids cry and cry, and then the child on their own is going over and starting to play with different toys, and they kind of distract themselves and move on, which again isn't like the worst thing ever. I'm not telling you not to do that, but what I am saying is if your aim is to really build self-regulation skills, you want to be able to get them to calm down first and then move on to the next thing. So back to this idea of not agreeing with the other parent. I think what we have to think about is one, if you are doing compensatory parenting, recognize it and it's okay. Like I wouldn't have any judgment about it. I would just see that like, okay, that is what I'm doing and that is what they're doing and have a conversation about it and keep it light. Like you all, like sometimes when I start to describe this to couples, you can almost see their shoulders start to drop in a coaching session and then they start to laugh because they're like, oh my God, we totally do that. And it isn't feeling called out in a way that feels like judgy, but it's almost like, oh my gosh, it's so true. That is exactly what I'm doing and kind of recognizing that there's probably better ways around it. And that's sort of the next spot is like, can you at least just agree that, hey, I don't want to have to be really permissive or I don't want to sit and over explain and things like that. But sometimes it just feels like you come out of nowhere and it gets really intense. And where could I give a little, but where do you need to give a little? And just recognize that with really thoughtful steps, you can get closer and closer to what I call the middle, which is generally where your kid is. So consider this. And the last kind of little insight that I'll leave you with that comes up in coaching too is when you do talk to your partner and you have disagreements about the way you're parenting, I always say, come from a place of connection, not correction. And often we overtalk over each other. If it's moments when we feel emotionally escalated ourselves, we're a lot more likely to engage in more of a combative tone. We're wanting to fix what the other person's doing. We insist we're right and we insist that they're wrong. And anytime you sort of see the conversation heading in that direction, just know right away, create some sort of, this is where PAR is such a good process for you, that pause, acknowledge, respond, reflect. Just pause. And then just acknowledge, like, I'm feeling really dysregulated right now. I know this conversation isn't going to end well. I don't think it's going to be productive. Can I walk away? Where can we build in space? He's probably feeling just as frustrated, or she's probably feeling just as frustrated. And how can we resume this conversation in a more anchored way, in a more settled way? And create time and spaces where you guys both have a regulated nervous system, and then you can come back to it and just go, all right, let's try that again. And look at it from the place of, is my aim to connect or is it to correct? Connection is going to be child focused, not you focused. You have to remain open. So if you're the parent who tends to be the softer over explainer, be open to the other partner going, hey, I get it. And I love how loving you are. And I love the fact that you create this safety for our child. And I want that to continue. I'm learning from you. But at the same time, I just feel like we're giving in, or that boundary is constantly moving depending on how big the protest is. And like, what can we do together to get that to stop? That's where it feels like it goes off the rails. Simultaneously, the other person can say, I love that you know how to hold the line. I love that our kid understands that when you say something, you mean it. Where can we bring some softness to it? Where could we at least state the boundary and not go on and make it a personal attack and not take it personally? So that where could we find ourselves in the middle? So I could take a little of what you're doing and you can take a little bit of what I'm doing. So again, these are all prompts that I've used in coaching. These are things that I talk about a lot in coaching, but I wanted to leave you guys with that because again, this is too long for a video, but it's also just meant to be a quick snippet. So maybe you're walking, maybe you're driving to work, maybe you're listening in your home, but I hope that gives you a little bit of a way through if you're finding yourself in the stress of being in constant disagreement with your partner. When I see couples make that shift and all of a sudden they're like team kid, because that's really what we're trying to get to. And they have a plan that they both can consistently implement because we've worked on like what framework will feel the best for both of you and what feels doable. And that starts to happen and it takes form. I can't tell you how transformational that is, even as a partnership, because now all of a sudden, not only do you both feel good about what you're doing and you're no longer participating in compensatory parenting. But what also starts to happen is your child responds better because you're both on the same page. You're both doing the same thing. So the more consistent and predictable our responses are for kids, and the more consistent and predictable our boundaries are, the more safe kids feel because now their environment becomes predictable. They very clearly understand where the line is. And even if they push against it, they kind of know where and how that will play out, and they're able to self-regulate and kind of live within this space where they can dwell and create and do and be while feeling safely anchored in the fact that you've created this safe, predictable environment. So I will leave it there, but if you have additional questions, you guys can always email me. I look at all of my emails. So you can send an email at albiona@theparentingreframe.com. I will link it below. And if this resonates with you, just let me know. And if you're like, oh my gosh, I heard the episode with compensatory parenting, we 1,000% do it. Thank you for that. Or this is what I gleaned from it, but here's a follow-up question. I'd love to hear from you. It always makes my day to just see where and how these episodes land in your homes and what the takeaways end up being. So thank you so much for being here, guys. Until next time.